I think that we can go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everyone to the 2020 Wisconsin Law Review Symposium. Our organizing theme is Wisconsin's Intellectual History and Traditions. My name is Abby Chase, and I'm the Wisconsin Law Review Symposium editor alongside Connor Clegg. We wanted to use this opportunity to introduce ourselves and our organizing theme, address some logistics, and most importantly, we wanted to express our gratitude to all of the people who have helped to make this event possible.
Unmute.
Thank you. It's the first technical difficulty of the day. So this year marks the 100th anniversary of the Wisconsin Law Review. In 1920, students and faculty at UW Law School founded the journal. 15 years later, in 1935, students were designated as the Law Review's sole editors. Today, the Law Review publishes 6 issues annually and distributes copies of those journals to subscribers worldwide. Over the past 100 years, our journal has strived to publish novel, timely, and important scholarship. Today and tomorrow, we gather to reflect on the work of the University of Wisconsin Law School and its scholars, and to consider the future of legal scholarship in 5 distinct fields of study. We are thrilled that you have chosen to join us here for this historic event.
And to our knowledge, we believe that this is the first time that the symposium has been hosted virtually, so we wanted to briefly address some of the logistics that come with operating this event via Zoom. We'll start with CLE instruction. So if you're a Wisconsin attorney here, please listen up. The Wisconsin BBE has approved this event for up to 9 CLE credit hours for Wisconsin attorneys. So to receive credit for attending the panel, you need to email a 2-word passcode along with your full name to Justine Selesky at justine.selesky@wisc.edu. I will include this in the chat, so don't worry if you did not have the chance to write that down. You'll receive the first word, part 1 of the passcode, in the middle of each specific panel, and you'll receive the second word or part 2 of the passcode at the end of every panel. So if you plan to attend the entire symposium for 5 panels, that means that you'll email Justine a total of 5 times. Keep in mind that each of our 5 panels will have a unique 2-word passcode. And we ask that after the end of each panel, you email Justine part 1 and part 2 of the passcode no later than 90 minutes after the conclusion of each panel if you would like to receive CLE credit for attending. If you have any questions about CLE specifically, feel free to contact me at atchase@wisc.edu. And like I said, I will include all of this information in the chat following Dean Tokaji's keynote address.
Thank you, Abby. I'd also like to address our Q&A format. So the last 15 minutes of each panel, including the keynote address, will be reserved for audience Q&A. So if you have a question that you would like addressed during the Q&A, please type out your question using the Q&A feature in Zoom. You can find this located on your bottom toolbar. The questions that you type in and send are not visible to the entire audience, only to the hosts and the panelists. You may send in as many questions as you would like and at any time during the panel. But please know that since time is limited in that there's 15 minutes for Q&A, not all questions will be answered.
Thanks, Connor. And finally, we really want to use this time to thank all of the people who helped us plan this event. We'd first like to thank last year's Wisconsin Law Review editorial board for sending out the call for symposium proposals and selecting the organizing theme of Wisconsin's intellectual history and traditions. In particular, we'd like to thank our former EIC, our former editor-in-chief, Olivia Radich, and the former symposium editors, Nathan Kinsey and Meg Sternitsky, for their early contributions to this event. Next, we would like to thank our current editorial board and Wisconsin Law Review staff for all of their support and for their participation in this symposium. And we would especially like to acknowledge our current editor-in-chief, Anya Gersoff, our senior articles editor, Rebecca Rosenthal, and our senior online editor, Harper Brown, for their help in planning, publishing, and promoting the symposium. Now, aside from the members of the Wisconsin Law Review, we would also like to thank our co-sponsors for the symposium, the University of Wisconsin Law School, the Institute for Legal Studies, and JD Grants. We have received a tremendous amount of support and assistance from our faculty and staff here at UW. In particular, we'd like to thank Samuru Adapatu for all her help planning this event. and she's actually going to be speaking as a panelist tomorrow, and we certainly look forward to her presentation during the Global South panel tomorrow, starting at 9 a.m. We'd also like to thank Justine Selesky for her assistance with CLE. And we would additionally like to thank Ginny Jasty, Tammy Kempfert, Emily Buckman, and Kimberly Rather for assisting with the marketing efforts and the communications for this event. For their technical support, we would like to thank Patrick Long, Daryl Burney, and Bridget Wieland. And finally, this symposium would not be possible without the efforts and contributions of our panel chairs and panelists. We would like to thank our 5 panel chairs, Linda Green, Heinz Klug, David Trubeck, Louise Trubeck, and Jonathan Lipson for submitting 5 outstanding proposals and for assembling a fantastic lineup of speakers for this symposium. We're sure that you'll enjoy it.
And with that, we will start our symposium. We would like to thank and welcome Dean Dan Tokaji, who will be presenting the keynote address momentarily. Although our symposium topic takes into consideration the last 100 years of legal scholarship at Wisconsin, we also intended to consider Wisconsin's place in scholarship for the next 100 years. As the new dean of the law school, Dean Tokaji best represents the future of UW Law School and the person we felt best suited to present the keynote address during this centennial celebration. Dean Tokaji comes to the University of Wisconsin from The Ohio State University, where he served as the Associate Dean for Faculty and a Professor of Constitutional Law at the Moritz College of Law. A member of the Ohio State faculty from 2003 to 2020, he taught a variety of courses, including civil procedure, civil rights lawyering, comparative constitutional law, election law, and voting rights, to name a few. He is a leading authority, in fact, in those last fields in election law and voting rights. Dean Tokaji's scholarship addresses questions of voting rights, free speech, and democratic inclusion, and he has published over 50 law review articles, book chapters, and other scholarly papers on a wide range of topics. Dean Tokaji has entitled his keynote address, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the University of Wisconsin Law School. And without any further delay, please join us in welcoming Dean Dan Tokaji.
I did it myself. Thank you so much, Abby and Connor. It's a delight and a true honor to be part of this symposium, and especially as a new dean, to have the opportunity to discuss and celebrate with you our intellectual traditions at the University of Wisconsin Law School and our rich history, which includes our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So on behalf of everyone here at the law school, let me first say to all of you who are participating today, it's really a privilege to welcome you to this annual symposium. As you know, the theme is Wisconsin's intellectual history and traditions. Given that theme, it's more than a little ironic that we can't all be together here today and tomorrow in Madison, Wisconsin because of the pandemic. That said, one of the things that I've discovered in my first 2.5 some months as dean of this wonderful law school is that we don't have to be physically present together in the same space to be a part of a community. So even though we're physically distant, even though I can't right now see most of your faces, I'm still delighted to welcome you all into our community today and tomorrow, and grateful to all of the symposium editors, all of the Wisconsin Law Review editors, including Abby and Connor, for putting together in this event, and to all of you for being a part of it. When the symposium editors asked me to deliver the keynote address at this symposium, I didn't hesitate to answer yes. And it took me just a few seconds to decide on my theme of diversity, equity, and inclusion at the University of Wisconsin Law School. Because at this law school, diversity, equity, and inclusion are central to everything we do. At least we try to make diversity, equity, and inclusion central to all we do. There isn't a day and rarely an hour that goes by where I'm not talking about or thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in some way as dean. That has been especially true for me coming in as a new dean in the wake of, well, the events that we've seen over recent months and indeed recent years. And at this point, I'm going to try to share my screen with you. If it's not working, please do let me know. You should be now seeing a slide that says diversity, equity, and inclusion at the University of Wisconsin Law School, with Bascom Hall, our administrative headquarters here at the university, behind it, and a Black Lives Matter sign in front. By the way, because I am not able to see your faces right now, I would ask one of the Symposium or Law Review editors to speak up if there's any kind of technical problem. And I do see the signal, Abby. Thank you so much. Of course, we here in Wisconsin, like everyone around the country, has been horrified, sometimes traumatized, by the killing of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and so many others. Within just a few weeks of my becoming dean, we here in Wisconsin were devastated at the shooting of Jacob Blake, an unarmed Black man in Kenosha, Wisconsin, who was shot 7 times by police officers there. And then a few days later, by the shooting of 3 protesters, 2 of whom were fatally shot by an armed vigilante. As lawyers, law students, law professors, and law school leaders, we cannot pretend that these problems will fix themselves, nor can we act as though they are someone else's problem. They are our problem, all of us, but especially those of us who have committed our careers to the law and its improvement. Fighting for racial justice, both inside and outside the walls of our law schools, is a central component of our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. The University of Wisconsin-Madison and the UW Law School accept that responsibility, as I hope all of our institutions will. This university and this law school's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion is one of the big things that brought me here to serve as dean. It's a part of the DNA of this law school, as I'll explain. And if you'll indulge me for a few minutes, let me say it's part of my DNA and my personal history as well. For I am a 3rd generation Japanese American. As I'm sure you all know, during World War II, over 100,000 Japanese and Japanese Americans were imprisoned by the United States government, forced to evacuate their homes, at least those who were living on the West Coast. Almost 70,000 of them were US citizens. They were forced to sell their businesses, many if not all of their personal belongings, put on trains and sent to relocation camps like the one you see here. The family in the lower left-hand corner at one of these relocation camps at Manzanar, well, this is my family, my grandfather, my grandmother, and my father, the little boy you see there in his overalls. He was one of the people who was incarcerated during World War II. I'm also the spouse of the child of immigrants from India, and for many years before I entered law teacher was a civil rights lawyer, fighting, among other things, to preserve race-conscious affirmative action in California at a time that it was under fire. So diversity, equity, and inclusion are part of my personal history, as well as a part of this law school's history, as I'll relate to you today. This law school's commitment to the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion, as I said, they're a big part of what brought me here. But in the months since I've become dean, I've learned more and have had occasion in preparing my remarks for you today to learn more that I'll share with you. And I'll look forward to you all educating me further and helping me learn more about this great law school's traditions over the next couple of days. But in the time that I have remaining, what I'd like to do is share some of our history as well as some of the things that are going on now to try to help make good on our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly when it comes to race and racial justice. Diversity, which I'll speak of first, has a long tradition at this law school. The law school opened in 1868. You see the law school building as it existed in the late 1800s on your left. Our first African-American student was admitted just a few years later in 1875. On the right, you see one of our first African-American students, William T. Green, who went on to a distinguished career in Milwaukee after graduating from our law school in 1892. We also have a long history of including women at the law school. This is the first woman to graduate from UW Law back in 1885, Belle Case LaFollette, part of the LaFollette family, a very eminent family here in the state. But what I really most want to focus on in talking about our tradition of diversity, one more thing before then. I want to also salute one of the women pioneers on our faculty, who I learned about after becoming dean, Professor Margot Melly, who died a couple of years ago and turns out to have been the 14th women law professor on a law school faculty in the country. What I'm going to focus on most, however, in talking about our tradition of diversity is our legal education opportunities, or LEO program. This program is rooted in the 1960s at a time when our law school, like many, had very few students of color and no faculty of color. And so a plan to grow minority enrollment and provide scholarships was approved in December of 1967 here, which happens to be the month in which I was born. It included tuition remissions as well as financial aid. 6 students enrolled in the first LEO class in the fall of 1968. We subsequently worked with other Big Ten schools to set up a summer institute targeted towards prospective and entering students of color. Our emphasis on our LEO program included recruiting and funding Native American students as well. We have a very substantial number of Indian tribes here in the state of Wisconsin. Something that we're still working to improve is our diversity when it comes to Native American students. One of the key figures in our history of diversity and inclusion, I've learned, is Ruth Doyle, who was an assistant to the dean of the law school for many years. She was also the mother of someone who would eventually wind up becoming governor of this state, Governor Jim Doyle, and of a friend of mine, Ann Doyle, who was the spouse of one of my colleagues at Ohio State for many years. Since I've become dean, I've heard many stories about this drawer in which Ruth kept money to help out students, including students of color, with their financial needs while they were in law school, and also about how she helped them find positions. What you see right here is a clipping from her obituary describing how, while at the law school, she helped launch a successful initiative, that is our Leo initiative, to recruit and retain minority students, and stayed in close touch with many of them for years, serving as their mentor and friend. I want to tip my hat also to a couple of my emeritus colleagues who you see here, Bill Whitford and Peter Karstensen, who have shared information with me about our Leo program. And I'm still learning, but they've already been an important part of my education as dean. Today we have 5 student organizations: BALSA, Latino Law Students Association, Asian Law Students Association, Indigenous Law Students Association, and our Middle Eastern Law Students Association, representing the interests of our Leo students. We have just, I'm proud to say, admitted to the law school a class that is more diverse while also raising our median LSAT. Our class has more than twice as many Leo students as we enrolled just 3 years ago, and a shout out to our Associate Dean for Admissions and Financial Aid, Rebecca Scheller, and her team for their fantastic work in bringing in a class that is diverse in all dimensions, not just identity, but also their background, experience, and perspectives. But of course, we all know that diversity, while it is essential, isn't sufficient. One of the things I've heard many times over from students and sometimes from graduates is that they don't always feel like they belong at this law school, at other universities, at other institutions. And this is something that I think we've worked hard at, but we have to work even harder at. Let me talk a little bit about what our law school has done over the years on the front of inclusion. One of the towering figures in this law school's history, about whom I've learned a great deal in the months since I've become dean, is our former faculty member, Professor Jim Jones, who died in 2014. There was a special issue of the Wisconsin Law Review a few years ago in 2013, about a year before his death, that featured tributes to him from a number of distinguished law professors and administrators, including some of those who will be with us today, from Dean Mario Barnes, now at the University of Washington Law School, from our former dean, Dan Bernstein, from Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, from our own Linda Green, from Thomas Mitchell, our former Hastie Fellow and faculty member, who recently won the MacArthur Genius Award, and from Bill Whitford. Well, Professor Jones, who was given tribute to by the people I just mentioned, he recognized way back when that it wasn't enough just to try to recruit people of color to our student body, to our faculty. That, in the words of Professor Mitchell, he believed that law schools and universities had a responsibility to create qualified minority faculty candidates for the teaching market, instead of just seeking to find qualified minority candidates. Central to the idea of inclusion is that we have an affirmative responsibility, one that our law school, I'm proud to say, has long taken seriously. Professor Jones, as my colleague Professor Green described in her tribute in that 2013 issue of the Wisconsin Law Review, he was born in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1924, just 5 years after a white mob massacred Black sharecroppers who had organized to obtain fair prices for their cotton crops. As Professor Green also describes, he graduated from Lincoln University and subsequently obtained his JD from our law school in 1956. He went on to become a distinguished labor lawyer before joining our faculty in 1969. He specialized in the field of labor law as well as employment discrimination, at the time a nascent field. Professor Jones during his illustrious career at our law school, made many contributions on the diversity, equity, and inclusion fronts. But perhaps his greatest was creating and supporting a fellowship that I suspect many of you are familiar with, the William H. Hastie Fellowship Program. Back in 1973, Professor Jones founded the Hastie Fellowship, which was named after the Honorable William H. Hastie. This is a 2-year fellowship in which aspiring law professors from a diverse set of backgrounds may pursue a research agenda of their choice and get some teaching experience under their belt. Long before I became a part of this law school, I admired the University of Wisconsin Law School for being so foresighted in creating and maintaining this fellowship, which has given so many great and influential law professors their start. Among those who have been Hastie Fellows in the past are Dean Barnes, who I mentioned earlier, Ruben Garcia at University of Nevada, Las Vegas, Michelle Goodwin at UC Irvine, Stacy Leeds, the Vice Chancellor and former Dean at University of Arkansas, Professor Mitchell, our own Professor Richard Manette, my former colleague at Ohio State, Cortland Roser Jones, our former Dean here, my predecessor as Dean here at University of Wisconsin, Dan Bernstein. One of the most prominent of the former Hastie Fellows is Professor Kimberly Crenshaw of UCLA and Columbia Law Schools, who you see here in this picture alongside some of our other former Hastie Fellows. She writes back in that issue from 2013 of Professor Jones' pivotal role in integrating legal education that he had the foresight to diligently create a pipeline of minority law teachers. And as she describes it, this was shaped by Professor Jones's experience in the federal government, which taught him the importance of institutionalizing change, something that he so effectively did through the Hastie Fellowship and is really one of my models as dean, even though I didn't have the privilege of meeting him before his death. Imitation is, of course, the sincerest form of flattery. Since we established the Hastie Fellowship back in 1973, some other law schools have copied or borrowed this model, although I should say not nearly as many as I'd like. There's more competition for us in seeking Hastie Fellows, but that's a healthy competition. Yet we still have a long way to go in promoting and encouraging students, and in particular students of color, to pursue careers in law teaching and to develop that inclusion and sense of belonging. Thanks to the work of and contributions by many of our alumni, we announced last year the creation of the Jim Jones Chair here. There are many people who contributed, but two of the alumni who were leaders in the campaign to raise the $1 million that was required, which was matched by $1 million from John and Tashia Morkridge. Foremost among those here are alumni who raised money were Corey Nettles from the class of 1996 and Harold Jordan from the class of 1977. And we are very much hoping to fill the Jones Chair for the 22-23 academic year, by which time the outstanding pledges to the Jones Chair are due to come in. All right, well, I've talked about our tradition of diversity and some of the things that we've tried to do on the inclusion front. I want to now talk about equity. You know, when you hear discussions about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we often talk about these things together. I think there's probably more differences among people in what they mean by equity than there is on the first two. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I'm thinking when I use the term equity. and both what we've done and what we aspire to do here at the law school. One element of equity is what we do inside the law school to treat our students fairly and give them the resources they need to succeed. So part of equity is meeting students where they are, recognizing that some of our students, especially first generation students, are going to need some extra help. One of the ways through which we do this is through our academic enhancement program led by my colleague, Assistant Dean Moji Olaniyan. This is a program that does a fantastic job of helping our students develop the learning and study skills they'll need to succeed in law school and as lawyers, including through study groups and a lot of one-to-one work that Moji does with our students. This is a critical component of our commitment to equity. But as I mentioned, there's also an important external element to our commitment to equity. Those of us who have been here at University of Wisconsin, even for a short time like me, have no doubt heard about the Wisconsin idea. The idea is basically that this great public university is here to make life better for everyone. As former UW President Charles Van Hise said, "I shall never be content until the beneficent influence of the university reaches every family of the state." And when I'm asked about my vision for this law school, as I often am as a new dean, one of the things I say is to bring the Wisconsin idea, memorialized on this stone that I walk by as I'm walking, well, when we're on campus, between the law school building and Bascom Hall. It's to bring the Wisconsin idea to the world. This is also embodied in our law in action approach to legal education, one of the mainstays of our law school. This law in action approach emphasizes real life experience, and it's exemplified by our fantastic clinical programs at the law school, including our Economic Justice Institute, which provides assistance in civil matters to people in need, as well as our Frank J. Remington Center, which represents criminal defendants and inmates who are very much in need of assistance. It's part of our scholarly tradition as well. And what I really want to emphasize here in talking about our scholarly tradition is something that you'll hear about in the next panel, the University of Wisconsin Law School's historic connection to the critical race theory movement. Back in July 8th, 1989, more than 20 scholars gathered here in Madison for a workshop that was spearheaded by Professor Crenshaw and included such luminaries as Derek Bell, John Calmore, Harlan Dalton, Richard Delgado, Linda Green, Mari Matsuda, Kendall Thomas, and Patricia Williams. That workshop would go on to become a movement, critical race theory, which, among other things, urges us to study issues of racial justice and racial equality, not in the abstract, but with an understanding of the lived experience of people of color. There's a great article that comes out of a conference I was privileged to attend back in 2009 at the University of Iowa Law School on the founding of critical race theory by Dean Angela Onwuachi-Willig. It's really a nice discussion of our connection here at the University of Wisconsin Law School to the critical race theory movement. I have a personal history here as well that I'd like to share. When I was a law student, I started law school in 1991, just a couple of years after that workshop here at Wisconsin. I took a class called Exploring Alternatives to Neutral Principles with Professor Harlan Dalton. And it was wonderfully eye-opening for me and really changed the way that I saw and understood the law. One of the things we read in that seminar was this book, The Alchemy of Race and Rights, by Professor Patricia Williams, who at the time was an associate professor here at the University of Wisconsin Law School. And I'd never read anything else like it in my life. You know, it was, she had a way, she has a way in that book of weaving together personal stories of her and people she knows with a critical examination of the law in a way that I'd never read by anyone before. And I have with me, I've taken off the screen share for a second so I can show you my personal dog-eared copy of her book, The Alchemy of Race and Rights, which I had occasion to read back through as I was preparing to give my remarks for today. One of the things she describes in this marvelous book is standing outside the window of a Benetton store back in 1986 while shopping in New York. She writes, "I pressed my round black face to the window and my finger to the buzzer seeking admittance," and describes how she was denied admittance by the white teenager wearing running shoes inside. After about 5 seconds, he mouthed, "We're closed," and blew pink rubber at me. 2 Saturdays before Christmas at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, even though there were several white people in the store who appeared to be shopping for things for their mothers, as she was trying to do. And she subsequently describes how some aspects of this story were censored out by editors even after the piece was sent to press. All reference to my race, she writes, had been eliminated because it was against editorial policy to permit descriptions of physiognomy. And she goes on to conclude, to describe the power of racism as status quo. It is deep, angry, eradicated from view, but strong enough to make everyone who enters the room walk around the bed that isn't there, avoiding the phantom as they did the substance for fear of bodily harm. This was immensely moving to me as I was a law student. And even though as a law professor, my scholarly career has taken a different trajectory, my work isn't CRT scholarship. So I'm not part of CRT, but I feel that critical race theory is part of me, something that I feel is especially important to affirm at a time when critical race theory is under fire from powerful people. The power of stories, especially the stories of people who are historically marginalized, vulnerable, unseen, or forgotten, the stories of outsiders looking in, this is something I've never forgotten, and I hope that we'll never forget. So what I want to emphasize here as I reach the conclusion of my remarks is that diversity, equity, and inclusion aren't something separate from our intellectual life here at the University of Wisconsin Law School. They are part of our history, and they're essential to the fabric of our intellectual life. This is something I learned long before I became part of this law school, before I knew very much about it, in fact. So I thank you again for being part of this symposium, for joining me in learning more about and celebrating our intellectual history, but also considering and helping me think through what more we have to do. We are, of course, living in incredibly divided times at this moment, something that's never more apparent than it is right now, a few weeks before the election. We're divided, split, polarized along partisan and racial lines. Not only the difference in views of not only what should be, but what is, are incredibly pronounced, but hostility towards one another, what political scientists refer to as effective polarization, are at historically high levels, so much so that in my view, it threatens the future of our constitutional democracy. These commitments to diversity, equity, and inclusion, I submit, are never more important for us as lawyers, law students, law professors, and law school leaders than at this moment. We have a special responsibility in these capacities to drive the conversation forward, because as we all believe here at this law school, and I suspect all of you share this belief, ideas matter, words matter. They can lead to actions that have the capacity to transform the world for better or for worse. The notion underlying the Wisconsin idea and at the root of Law in Action is that universities should be making a difference in the real world. And that idea is at the heart and soul of this law school. So I thank you for being a part of this community, even though at a distance and even though for only a couple of days. Thanks for aspiring to be the change that we all seek. And as we say here in Wisconsin, onward. I think we have a few minutes, so I'm going to turn to Connor and Abby. I'd invited questions from the audience if we have the time here, but I'll leave that to your all's discretion.